Good afternoon. This is Dyke Hendrickson, and I am with the podcast Life Along the Merrimack. We meet each week at 2 o'clock and talk about life and the health and history of the Merrimack River. Of course, we define things broadly and sometimes can talk about all things that happen along the river or also on the streets or in the town. Today, my guest is Paul Harrington. Paul, thank you for being here.
Happy to be here this afternoon. Thank you.
Paul heads up the Greater Newburyport Village, which is a virtual organization that has come together in recent years. And Paul, maybe you can talk about the village, what it does, and how it can help people in this community.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. The village was kind of a brainstorm of a couple of fellows in Newburyport back in 2013. And they were experiencing either a family or a neighborhood situation where there were seniors who were aging in their homes quite comfortably, but they were in neighborhoods where they had help from the neighbors, or in one case, it was the family who was providing that kind of assistance. So they kind of thought, well, wouldn't it be good if we could come up with a way that we could have that type of opportunity for folks who didn't have family or were in a neighborhood that wasn't so well connected. So they gathered a group of Newburyporters and they got together and they formed the nonprofit that we know today as the Greater Newburyport Village. And their vision was that they would model it after the Beacon Hill Village. Now, we don't propose that we would be like Beacon Hill. So what we needed to do is find out what are the demographics around here. So they sent out a mailer to, well over 1,000 local folks. And when we got those replies, we were able to put some information together. Mm-hmm. We then gathered a group at the library on State Street, where we had probably 75 people show up. And from that group, we were able to get volunteers, probably 20 folks, who did the research to look at the villages around the country. There's 223 of the village organizations in the country. And in Massachusetts, Dyke, there are 18 of them.
So I'm thinking it would be free, Paul. Or maybe I'm not correct. Does one pay a fee or $10 fee or?
No, one of the situations that we looked at was how we could manage that. And it's determined that our village is a membership organization. So there is a fee of for a single membership, it's a $300 annual fee. Mm-hmm. For a household, which would be, a couple, it's $450. However, what we do is we want not to be non-inclusive. So we have about 20%, and we have a goal of 25%, but we currently have 20% of our members are on what we refer to as our membership assistance program. And most of those folks pay no fee or whatever they may indicate that they could afford. So we let folks in the community churches and the community senior centers and so forth know about this opportunity if they have folks. What we want those folks, we want them to be folks who need the services that we provide.
So if I understand it, if, for instance, a person is living alone in town, say they broke their leg, say, they're not able to get out to the store very easily, or they might need a ride to the doctor, they might contact you, or if they're members, they'd be aware of you, but then they could set up perhaps a visiting time or someone who would be assigned to help them or check in on them from time to time.
Yes, we have actually worked with Anna Jakes, where we have been, it isn't a very popular thing for us, but we on occasion have had folks who have been discharged from the hospital and come in and have had like a temporary membership where we provide them the full benefit of services that we have. And those benefits are, as you suggest, transportation actually is the largest benefit which we do provide. And of course that's followed by household chores of changing light bulbs and things like that.
The senior center here on High Street has been a significant asset in town for the last decade or so. Are you affiliated with the senior center, or do you ever have meetings there, or is there not necessarily a connection?
Well, no, we have connection with the senior center. A lot of things that we talk about will be pre-COVID, okay? Because we could talk about last year, which is a whole new ballgame. But
yeah,
but in the past, we have always had our board meetings at the senior center, at the conference room at the senior center, and on the third Wednesday of each month, we would do a village talk presentation, which we would arrange for the speakers and so forth, which we would provide for their community days program. And we stay in touch pretty much with certainly with Roseanne in the past, and now with Paula as we go forward, and work with Mary Kelly on any opportunities that we have that we can work together.
Mentioning the COVID and, discussion of anything over the past year does bring COVID into focus. Did that hamper your programs, Paul?
That totally put us into a category of redesign. We actually have some very talented and creative people. On April 15th, everything changed for us. That's when we decided we could no longer have in-person services. We couldn't have in-person meetings and so forth. So what we did is we went virtual, and we all learned Zoom. Okay, that's why I had no trouble coming on today.
That's a skill we all had to learn very quickly.
Yeah. So since then, what we had done is, in order to keep people connected, each Tuesday we would send an update to members' emails, and we sent 59 of them. This past week was the 59th issue. And what we would do is we'd provide interesting links for them to latch on, may listen to a symphony or hear a particular podcast that was of interest. We had 211 of these links that people had to go out and find.
Wow.
And then that they were appropriate for the day, we would have links in this Tuesday update so that folks could join a chat room, which would take place at 4:00 every other Monday. We didn't get great participation, but we'd have 4 or 5 or 6 folks show up that each week. So, isolation is a big deal for the seniors. And so those were things that we did.
Well, that's great. I know this is Dyke Hendrickson. The podcast is Life Along the Merrimack, 96.3 Joppa Radio and local Channel 9 cable TV. I'm talking with Paul Harrington, and who is the head of Greater Newburyport Village. And I was able to speak to your team a week or two ago, Paul. I wrote a book about the Merrimack River called Merrimack, the Resilient River. And I spoke for about 45 minutes. So thank you very much for having me as a guest. And I hope I reached some of your members at that time.
Well, you did. And those talks are something that we did. We did 16 of those talks, and you were the last one that we did last week. But we have one of our members, Bill Franz, is a Dickens enthusiast, so he told people a lot about Charles Dickens. We're fortunate to have Professor Lois Asher, who's a professor at Wentworth Institute. And she gave us wonderful presentations about the molasses flood. She helped us take apart the Renaissance, which was kind of not my thing, but the folks enjoyed it just the same. And of course, we all know Bill Getty and what a crowd Bill Getty can draw. And, Bill took us on walks through local paths in Newburyport and all over the North Shore, showing us the birds and the
Mhm.
and flowers and so forth. Then he brought us to Montana, where that was great. But the ultimate was he brought us to his crossing Bhutan, which was in the Himalayas. So,
Wow.
and you can imagine when we have that event with Bill Getty, even when we did the live things at the senior center, we had Bill, the place would be overflowing. He draws.
Yeah, he's just a remarkable person, and he's a wonderful makes great presentations, and you always come away with quite a bit of knowledge. Talking about Newburyport, Paul, I don't think you're a native of Newburyport. How did you find your way to this community? Where did you live before you lived here on the North Shore?
Well, you just came up with an interesting segue. We brought our family up in Bedford, Mass.
Mm-hmm.
After that, we spent a few years in Acton before coming here. We came here in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
But why did I come here? Well, when I lived in Bedford, I had a very good friend who used to take me to Newburyport, and we used to go to Amesbury. We'd go over to the state park, and guess what we would do? I was being taught how to become a birder. Now, who do you suppose was teaching me? Bill Getty. So Bill Getty and I go way back. We're friends. So that's kind of what brought us to Newburyport. Having visited Bill and Marsha here for some time, we found this to be just a delightful place to come. So,
well, we were living in Lexington, Mass, a couple decades ago, and we came up one day. We saw an article in a magazine which says the last places you can buy a mansion for $150,000. So we said, "Oh, a mansion, $150, we can swing it." So we came up here, went down High Street. Yes, there were a lot of mansions, but nothing was for sale for $150,000. Well, the media. I can say that because I'm in the media. But anyway, we went out to Plum Island. We walked on the beach. We walked on the boardwalk along the Merrimack. We went to the grog, had a couple beers and a hamburger, and say, "Gee, why don't we live in Newburyport?" So that was our first introduction to it. But it's quite an interesting town. And in terms of people who you can bring to lecture, Paul, I imagine, there's quite an array of assets that you can ask, or if not to lecture, at least to be part of your group.
Yeah. We actually had a lecture done by, well, I'm drawing a blank on her last name, but Glee.
Woodworth.
Yeah, she did a thing about the history of Newburyport and those who came before us, the sailors and shipbuilders and all those folks that built the community. So that was another interesting thing that we did. But yeah, it's a community that has a wealth of resources for interesting things to do. Museum, the Maritime Museum and so forth is the firehouse and everything is just terrific.
You mentioned people of need. When you look at a profile of people who are members in the Greater Newburyport Village, what is the age group range? I'm sure there's no specific cutoff point, but what is the age group of people who are involved?
Well, what we attract folks who are of retirement age. We like to get folks to join the village as recent retirees. When you retire, there's a life change where all of those associations you had in business, it doesn't take them long to kind of find that you're not quite as important as you used to be. So you need to kind of find some new adventures to take part in. When I first retired and came to Newburyport, as I said, I knew Bill Getty and I knew a few other folks in town. But after joining the village, I must have 35 what I consider fairly close friends that I have gained through the village. So I think that by attracting folks who have recently retired, we provide that kind of opportunity. And as they age, we provide the opportunity for them to get services. And while they're young, they can provide the services. So, we see it as a lifelong thing. But most folks are over the age of 60, basically, and we have people in their 90s.
Well, talking about retirement and working, what was your field, Bill? What were you involved, Paul? What were you involved in when you were in the working world?
Well, I was, excuse me, I was the president of a mechanical contracting company.
And what do those folks do?
A mechanical contractor is a kind of a glorified plumber, okay? But it was a rather large firm, and we did work in Eastern Massachusetts, in Boston vicinity. But we did major projects where we did plumbing, HVAC, heating, ventilating, air conditioning, and fire protection sprinklers. So it was quite a nice company, and I really enjoyed doing that.
So, for instance, if you got a contract for maybe a new apartment building, you would do the plumbing, the air, the heating. Is that type of situation?
Yeah, that's exactly what we would do. It was often negotiated work. The work that we did in Boston would be, the high-rise condominiums and office buildings. We did work at Merrimack Pharmaceutical and lab work at Boston University and MIT. They were all major, pretty complicated. Projects.
So that must have been a very, intellectually rewarding. It's rewarding probably in terms of the business. But this is a little off the topic. But talking about building, the last couple times I've been into Boston, the amount of building going on in Boston right now seems quite remarkable. I don't know if you've been in town, but just as an observer, isn't this an unusually hot moment for building?
It is exceptionally hot, and it's an interesting market because the market has changed, of course. Office building situations, as we read in the papers, have changed considerably. And there are even reports of some office buildings. There's one in South Boston, which was formerly Manulife for John Hancock, and is being converted into a laboratory space. So, so there's lots going on, and sometimes this work, you could have a slowdown because people get nervous about COVID, and then it kind of comes back. And it comes back with a vengeance because things build up, that things that are so-called shovel ready pile up a bit. But it's been, I know my company has probably grown exponentially in the last 5 years because of the amount of work.
Well, when I worked for the Boston Business Journal in the 90s, we were down at 200 High Street, which is near the waterfront. And at that time, they were just finishing up the Big Dig. So not just the Big Dig, but actually the underpasses, taking down the overpasses. So that was a big moment. Then they filled up that whole area along the peninsula with very large hotels. So that was another big moment in, say, 2000 to 2010. Now, as you say, they're enormous office buildings. And you started to talk about this with the COVID and the economy, and people talking about working from home rather than the office. Is there any speculation on whether they can fill these office buildings?
Well, some of what I have seen and heard from some of my old compatriots is that some of the office space that will be occupied, they used to have these 16-foot cubicles that they would operate in.
Mhm.
But, they're going to have to spread folks out a little further now as they go forward. So that it's possible that while folks may not have as many folks in their office space, but those folks that are there will need more space
Mm.
to operate. So there's some thought about that. But I think that the developers and owners of the buildings are really putting out some bargain deals to try to get folks to move into space now.
The other thing, Paul, that I've seen in some markets is some builders are feeling they're not going to be able to fill them up with businesses, and they're thinking about, they work with nonprofits to start either residential housing or not low income, but affordable income housing, because the Boston market, my kids live there, and it's so expensive. It's just hard to think how a young person starts out and finds a place in the Boston market. But could that be a possibility too, that they'll try to get some apartments and small condos put in there?
Well, I'm sure what's going to happen is, there's always been what's known as a linkage thing, whenever a developer goes in and he decides to put up, a 40-story condominium building with these multi-million-dollar units, that they are required to provide a percentage of affordable housing elsewhere in the city. And I think that, with the current political situation and everything, that I think there'll be a lot of pressure on that type of linkage to be more. It sometimes falls a little flat, and I think that there'll be more pressure to get that type of work done.
Well, that's happening right here in Newburyport. Mayor Donna Holliday and city officials, about 80 units, apartment units just have been constructed down near the railway station here on Boston Way, and about 10% were earmarked for affordable units, in part because a lot of the restaurants and shops, they need people in the community. Everyone wants wealthy executives, I suppose, but you also need bartenders, waiters, people to work in the shop, and young people to start their lives off. So Newburyport also is trying to provide housing for moderately income families.
Yes, it's an important endeavor. Yeah.
And this is Dyke Hendrickson. This is the podcast Life Along the Merrimack, 96.3 radio and Channel 9 on local cable. I'm talking to Paul Harrington, who is head of the Greater Newburyport Village. And one question I had, Paul, is if someone were interested in either joining the village or in helping out in some way, how could they get active in the village?
Well, they can go on our website, which is a very long thing to type in, but unfortunately we picked a long name for the village. But the website is the Greater Newburyport Village.org. And you can go on there, and there is a link on that homepage where you can download a membership application, or you could read about membership and the reasons why you might want to be a member, mm-hmm. and some of the things that we provide. You could also, on that page, log on to, if you were interested in volunteering. Volunteers, we have what we call good neighbor volunteers, and those are the folks who go out and they provide the in-home services for folks, changing light bulbs, moving air conditioners mm-hmm. in and out of windows and so forth. We have folks who provide transportation. So it's not uncommon for us, when not in COVID, of course, to provide lots of transportation to folks who are going to doctor's appointments. For example, in Danvers is a very common ride. But they can also call our number, which is the village phone number is 978-288-8255. 206-1821. And they could, we usually ask folks to leave a message and we call you right back.
Mhm.
But we are a virtual, we don't have an office. We all work virtually.
Mhm.
But
Well, this is good information. You know, I was with the Daily News, a newspaper in town, until a couple of years ago, and I did a couple stories on the village. And you know, it seems to help out at both ends. The recipients get a lot of aid, and also the volunteers seem quite satisfied with their relationship.
yeah, there's absolutely that. You know, there's nothing that feels better than going in and helping somebody. And sometimes it's a tedious job. We had a member who was in the early stages of Alzheimer's, and he lived alone. And we put together a group because he needed folks to visit with him
Mhm.
and kind of be checking in on him, and you know, making sure that he was preparing his meals and so forth. We don't provide any medical assistance. We can't help him,
Right.
but we can certainly provide him that social network. And I tell you, the folks who did that, the response was overwhelming. I mean, people just would, after they would come home from doing that, they would send emails to each other. What a great experience it was
Mhm.
to kind of help to somebody. So
Well, it sounds like a win-win situation, the Greater Newburyport Village. I've been talking with Paul Harrington. We're just about out of time, Paul, but I wanted to ask you, since this is life along the Merrimack, do you ever get down to the water? Are you able to walk on the walkway along the Merrimack here in town?
you know, I am, and I love to do it. And I'll tell you, if I have a quick thing to tell you right now, I was down there last fall, and near the bandstand area where the horseshoe is, where the boats are.
Yes,
There's a couple of ramps there, and there's stairs on either side. So I got the bright idea that it would be nice to have a railing on one of those sets of stairs, because I would prefer to go up the stairs than to go on the ramp, because I do have a disability. I have some difficulty walking, you know. So I sent an email to the waterfront group,
Mhm.
and lo and behold, they put the railing in. So if you think you may be not listened to, I was listened to, and it was really great. But I truly enjoy going down to the riverfront, whether I'm walking by Cashman Park or whether I'm down on the boardwalk, where there's plenty of people to talk to, and it's a delightful walk along the river.
Well, the boardwalk in Newburyport is a wonderful thing. It's known as the Peter Matthews Boardwalk. He was the mayor as well. Byron Matthews is perhaps the better known of the Matthews brothers who were mayor. The Peter Matthews Boardwalk, it's open now, of course, and you know, it's a wonderful asset to the community. And I'm glad to hear that you're able to, you know, walk along there. And we'll be down. I've been down there much in terms of writing my book. I wrote a book about the Coast Guard. So the waterfront is a wonderful asset. We're going to finish up now. This is the podcast, Life Along the Merrimack. I'm with Paul Harrington, who heads the Greater Newburyport Village. Paul, I want to thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
For your information on how to get involved in the Greater Newburyport Village.
Thank you so much.
Okay, that's it for us. We'll be back again next Tuesday. This is Life Along the Merrimack, Joppa 96.3 radio, local cable TV, Channel 9, Life Along the Merrimack. And thank you once again, Paul Harrington.